Welcome, everybody. My name is Sejal Thakkar, and I am your host for today's exclusive Nobody Studios Culture live stream show. And today I'm excited to welcome Andy Walsh to the show. Andy is a seasoned leader, and he has a diverse background with startups, working with creative agencies and the media industry. And we are fortunate to have Andy join Nobody Studios as our strategic advisor. So, welcome to the show, Andy.
Hey, Sejal, it's so nice to join you.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. You know, what we're going to be talking about today is a topic that psychological safety is a topic that really is close to my heart and one that resonates with me. So I'm looking forward to learning from you today. But I wanted to start off by asking you a question that I love asking everybody that joins me on this show, right? We always say that Nobody Studios will be defined by the people we attract to this journey. And so, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to join this crazy adventure that we're all on?
Yeah, absolutely. And my background's I love that my career path could not be defined in any linear story. It's sort of I started off as a young kid loving creative culture, from music, arts, playing, being on stage to being behind stage. And I think through that process, I've always found that creative culture is a beautiful way to understand historically what's happened in the real world. Originally, it was very abstract, but I think now there's so many beautiful ways that what's going on in life is reflected through art. And my space in that, I'm a strategist by trade, and I've always looked at like what's happening from a tech innovation point of view, how that marries up with creative culture, and how those things come to life. And I think what we're looking at now with Nobody is opportunities and issues that happen in the world. And I think that creative culture and technology collide very, like, I guess, impactfully in the space that we're in. So from the first conversation I had with Jason to meeting Mark, it was clear that there was very like-minded approach to the people and the attitude, but also the work. And for me, I have such a broad set of skills from strategy to launching startups. As you said earlier, I have a financial brain and a creative brain, and I use both of them very equally. So I think for me, it's the opportunity to make a difference, but also use my full suite of skills with what I do day to day.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed our conversations, and I know that you and I are going to do a lot to really sort of elevate the culture at the studio in just a whole different way, right? You have years of experience in helping companies design and launch successful culture strategies. Like I was looking at some of the stuff and some of the companies that you've consulted with, and I was literally like blown away. And the work that you do is so important, right? And especially in the world that we're living in right now. And so, based on your experience so far with, Nobody Studios, what are some of the things that you've noticed that make our culture unique from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, for me, I've seen, like, I've worked in, obviously, I'm Australian, but I've worked in Australia, in London, been in New York now for a long time. And I think that the cultural observation, as far as understanding people, their history, like how they were raised, that I guess the things that they're into, how those things come together to unify folks at a global perspective. And I think that we've never been more connected, but the irony is that we've also never been further apart. We have these very superficial relationships now with folks through digital platforms and social media. And I think as far as like pairing that back to the question, as far as what I've seen is the values and the passions, I think that there's a lot of like-minded folks, and there's a structure that I use a lot in the strategy work, which is anchored around tribes and packs. And if you think about going back a long time ago, the pack was foundation of life, right? You had your local community, and you relied on, other parents, other families to help with your own children, to get food on your plate. And that sort of pack mentality has now evolved into suburbs and our connection with our neighbors. It feels like, post pandemic, that's gone full circle a little bit. I think like uniting to folks locally is really important. And then on the tribe piece, that's more passion based. And I think if you think about digital communities or things that you're into, I've got a massive passion for music. I love live music, recorded music, and I spend a lot of time finding new music. And if you go to a show, how you could be standing side by side with the perfect stranger, And there's something amazing that just breaks down a barrier immediately because you know the lyrics to a song, you know the history of where it came from. You've listened to that record over and over. And I think from a tribe point of view, that breaks it down. And what I've discovered by meeting the folks at Nobody Studios is that those things, that tribe and the pack, unite very beautifully, and that's not common in the world. Like we've got people all over the world, which is an advantage, but it also means that we're not side by side at desks. But I think there's something about the way that we all approach problems, challenges, opportunities, and we thrive in that creative process. Those two things come together, and that's the part that I've never seen before. Most people go to work and they have their home life, but when you're looking holistically at the world and what's happening, like that's a pretty unique environment.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God. And this, look, what you're saying is resonating with people. We got Min Bogata. We were just talking about you, Min, giving you a shout out. And we were saying just how awesome you are. Min's joining us and he's like, hey, favorite people, really looking forward to learning more about this topic. Thank you, Min, for joining us. I always love it when he joins and he's able to share his feedback on this conversation. So let's jump in because we're going to be talking about something, and thank you for sharing your insights on what you've experienced with the culture. I always love hearing about what people are experiencing, and everything that you say, resonates with me. And so today I really wanted to dig in with you on, you have a lot of different superpowers. Okay. It was hard for me to decide the topic for our discussion today because there were so many different things that I wanted to talk to you about. So maybe I'll have to invite you back for another episode because there's some other areas where I was like, I would love to talk to you on some cultural issues related to that. But for today, I want to talk about psychological safety because, with people like you said that are located all over the globe, all different, diversity of thought, diversity of everything, right? Geographical diversity, we're in different time zones, people of different races, cultures, etc. Fostering psychological safety becomes critical for us at the studio. And so, I've seen a lot of different definitions of how people define psychological safety. So let's start there. What is your definition of psychological safety? And let's start there. And then I have a couple more questions I want to ask you about that.
Yeah, 100%. It's foundational as far as like with people that you're around, mostly attached to the work environment, but quite often it can be a personal situation as well. But it's that trust, openness, and respect. So it's the ability to feel like that you can be the real you and that there's no sort of game that you have to play. So if you're in a space that has psychological safety, you can speak up and feel like that your point is valid at any point. And there's some things that we'll cover as far as some tension that comes through that, but in the ways that you need to navigate it. But I think for me, it's very much around that trust, openness, and respect, and being able to raise suggestions, concerns, etc., in a way where you feel like that you're going to be heard. You might be an intern, but you might be heard on the same level as the CEO of the company as well, and that your point and experience is valid. And that's more often than not where you find some juicy stuff too, the things that you may not have discovered otherwise. So there's lots of upside to doing that.
I know I'm constantly telling leadership teams, and I just did a training last week for a client and I reminded them that like good ideas can come from anywhere, right? It's not just the leader at the top. They can come from anywhere in the organization. And oftentimes, like you said, it's the people that are, working on these teams day in and day out. They're familiar with the pain point or the problem that we're trying to solve. They're able to quickly come up with some ideas that can be game changers, right? And I've seen that happen at Nobody Studios over and over again. And so, as you know, Andy, one of our core values is that we're people first, right? So our people first ethos, coupled with this concept of psychological safety, really goes to exactly what you said, has created this culture where mutual respect and support are the norm, right? So there have been so many situations where, a leader has gone through a personal challenge or the studio has dealt with something that we have, came about unexpectedly. And we've had to just step up and support each other to get through that. Right. So, give us some advice, give the leaders that are out there listening to this, talk to the leaders at Nobody Studios, what's their role in making sure that we continue to foster psychological safety within their teams?
Yeah, there's two things. There's the actual, I guess, how they act and behave. like people's behavior is as important. And I'm a father. I have a daughter who's nearly 10, and like I've even into basic human psychology, there's something quite interesting that's very similar to a leadership point of view, is that your child, and I know that you're a mum too, is that like you think that teaching them the rules is going to be what they follow. Like more often than not, it's going to be how you behave individually, that they'll take you as their leader, and they probably won't admit to it. They probably don't think you're very cool. But it's amazing how much your leadership, sets the standard as far as how you should operate, how you should behave, and what's right and what's wrong. So, you need to be very self-aware. So I think sort of how you communicate, how you're asking for feedback, making decisions and what that process looks like. A lot of self-awareness comes into that. So there's the human part of it, but then there's the process part of it too. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about, it's very almost in the same lane as psychological safety, is inclusion. So like people talk a lot about diversity, but I think inclusion in my mind is probably more important. It's understanding the people that you have around you, like what's unique about them and what's the same about them, and making sure that everyone has an equal seat at the table. And I'll give you a good example. I'm working with the guys at Valify at the moment, one of our amazing businesses that are coming out of Nobody Studios, and both the guys, Nick and William, are Italian, so they have English as a second language. They're very impressive at English. I don't speak any Italian at all, so I sort of feel inferior. But in that environment, quite often what you need to be able to do is give people information in advance. So this is one tactic that you can do to, if you have a meeting, give people time to read and be informed and understand what you're talking about so they can be an active contributor to that. They might need to spend some time reading, researching, etc., to be able to understand what it is, rather than put them on the spot in a room where they only have one chance to be able to speak up and say something. So I think there it's like the process needs to be give people time to think and nurture and have their ideas, and put that forward in a setting where, combined with a leader acting and behaving in a way that sets the right example, they feel like they're in a safe environment to be able to be heard. And it doesn't mean that that's going to be what's sort of decided upon every time, but at least they feel their point is valid. And there's some great case studies that you can look at. NASA went through some huge overhaul where they had to scientifically validate every decision. And then there was an incident, I can't think what mission it was, but there was, I think, maybe 5 of the astronauts died on the takeoff. And it was actually someone who was quite junior flagged there was an issue. But because it couldn't be validated by science, it was discredited. And it changed the whole process about how NASA operated. And there's a great, not analogy, an acronym rather, called HIPPO, which is the highest paid person's opinion. And more often than not, like if that's the case, then how do you actually move forward? If you've got a CEO who's, late in their years from experience point of view, like they might be pulling through references from the 80s, the 90s that contextually, functionally, like education wise, just aren't relevant just because they're there. So you need to make sure that you're aware of the shortcomings of an old structure and the opportunity of a new structure. But I think the thing that I want to add to the mix there too is that tension about making people feel valued versus not having committees. And I think that there's a fine line there, right? You want to make sure everyone has a chance to say something, but you don't want to go around the whole company and give everyone a chance to vote, because it will just slow you down and you'll have massive bottlenecks. So getting that right is definitely something to test and learn on. And I don't have a silver bullet answer for that one as far as like how you navigate it. But I think quite a sort of active feedback loop, which nobody is great at, is like something will happen. And I've seen Barry do it beautifully. It's sort of like we had this session and then he'll ask for candid feedback after the meeting and go like, what worked there, what didn't work, how do we improve this for next time? So you're always self-optimizing to make sure it's the best it can be.
Yeah, no. And, I love everything you said. You gave so many practical things, right? And you already went in the direction I wanted to follow up with you on, was that, a studio like ours, where we're global, where we have people located all over, we have different challenges, right? And so to continue to foster psychological safety on a day-to-day basis, you're right, it does start at the top, right? And we always are encouraging all of our leaders to lead by example, right? And just like what you said earlier, I've never worked at an environment or a workplace where like our leadership team openly acknowledges and talks about the mistakes that they've made and the lessons that they've learned. Like I haven't seen that happen. And I've worked with a lot of different companies in the way that we do, right? But it sets this precedent that making mistakes or errors is going to be a natural part of our growth and learning, right? Our goal is to build 100 companies. So in order to build those 100 companies, we're going to have to go through probably 1,000 or 10,000 of them to get to that 100, right? So we have to get very comfortable with speaking up when we have ideas or challenging an idea in a respectful way, and one of the other things I'll throw out there for people that are listening, in fostering psychological safety, I can't stress this enough. I really enjoy facilitating our global like virtual team building events like that. Those sessions, even though they're only an hour and we do it once every few weeks because our schedules are tight and everyone's all over, right? We do ours at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday or Thursday morning, right? So we have to find that time to accommodate as many people on our teams as we can. But having those kind of events, because you can automate and there's lots of technology that we use, but having that time to connect interpersonally and build that relationship, right? That helps us be more of a cohesive team so that we're likely to trust each other. We're likely to speak up and feel supported, which I think really is going to go a long way to fostering psychological safety, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you look at like post-pandemic, like we've gone through this really interesting global experiment as far as working remotely versus working together. And you've seen like huge companies have very different approaches to how they tackle whether you need to be in the office 5 days a week or you don't need to go back ever again, on the polar extremes. And I think what that sort of allowed us to do is look at like functional things, but also sort of psychological things in the sense of someone's individual happiness. Like say, for instance, there was a massive exodus out of San Francisco, as you would know, when people had the chance and everyone's gone to their idyllic life where they've probably bought a property much cheaper, their lifestyle may have changed, they may not have had that awful commute, getting around San Francisco to and from in the mornings. And like that change in lifestyle, there's upsides and downsides to that, right? You might have a better happiness, but then the lack of connectiveness that you have, or with your workmates, like there's upsides and downsides to that. So I think acknowledging that is really important, putting in process that's not cumbersome or creates a burden where it's process for process sake, but understanding sort of how you function. And there's another one which I love, which is that wicked and kind learning environments. And I think that for me, like going into that is also another space. And if you look at a kind learning environment, like chess is a great example where there's a board, there's the same number of pieces, you could play anybody in the world and it's exactly the same. And so that kind learning environment it's repetitive and you can learn it as well. Whereas a wicked learning environment is when you don't know what's going to happen next, but you learn ways to navigate and problem solve. And I think that nobody does a good job of creating the best of both, where the kind learning environment is repeated tasks that give you confidence, but allow you to play your role, but also connect on the same rules as someone that might be in a different country to you or a different time zone to you. And then the wicked part of it is the industry that we're in. We're in a world that is going through some of the most rapid change it's probably ever done. If you think about various revolutions that we've sort of gone time by time in previous generations. So I think that we're already in that sort of very fast treadmill cycle. So, that change is a given. It's sort of like how you process that and deal with that is the piece that I think connects and unites you in a way where you feel like that you're all in it together.
Yeah. And but there's challenges to what we're talking about. And you're kind of, weaving in some of these challenges into what you're talking about. But it sounds easier than it is to foster psychological safety, right? Especially when you think about a lot of us haven't even met in person. So we've talked I've some of the members on the leadership team, right? I've been working with them for 3 years and I haven't met them in person yet. And here we are making big decisions on the studio, right? And crafting some of these strategies together. And we haven't connected on that personal level. And so there are definitely challenges when you're working in a remote sort of environment. And so, you've talked about what leaders can do, right? And being role models and some of the things that they can do to help foster psychological safety, right? But talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges or obstacles that companies need to anticipate. So if somebody's out there listening and they're like, okay, we're starting from square one, right? We know we need to lead by example, but what are some things we should be planning for right now? What are some challenges that we're going to be expecting? Give us a couple of tips on how they might be able to, what those are and how they might be able to overcome those.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the piece, like we've covered them sort of in different
Yeah.
lights before, but I think as far as one of the trends that we're seeing right now is this transparency that consumers are expecting with big corporations, and that's like a lot of things focused around ESG, as far as the governance part of it, sustainability, and ethics as well. And I think within that, what we're also seeing is then that the internal culture of a company needs to very closely connect and unite with the external culture as far as what consumers sort of perceive. So I think the answer to that is make sure that it's very consistent. So the values, your purpose, everything you're doing as a corporation, big or small, it can't be something token. It needs to be foundational as far as the type of people that you hire, through to sort of how you act and behave, how you make decisions. So I think foundationally, having something that the leaders or the founders or the people, even at a board level, how do you define something that you actually embrace and goes, yeah, this actually is us and this reflects us. So when you're hiring people, you're making decisions around marketing communications, it could be something you do from a sustainability point of view. There's always a reason why, and having
Mhm.
everyone rally behind that, and the businesses have that really beautiful purpose that people rally behind, and that's a storytelling opportunity, and like consumers buy into that. And as questions or more questions get asked from consumers long term, like brands are going to be challenged. So if they're not buttoned up there, then that's critical. I think that the second piece is probably then off the back of that is around process that I touched on. So like how do you have this iterative cycle of development where just because you've done something one way for a period of time that you always consider it's going to be the right way, and sort of like actively having health checks on your process. And I call it hygiene with the
Mhm.
startup I work with, in the sense of like, how do you function? What are the bottlenecks in your business? What are challenges that you face with those? Because it sometimes feels easier to do things the same way rather than pause and have like a little inflection moment where you go, okay, like, is this working? Maybe get someone else outside who's from a different field actually challenge you and go like, completely independent and an objective opinion that has no bias challenge you on certain things that just improve and refine what you're doing, because the world changes so fast. Businesses need to change and adapt accordingly. So I think that that dynamic process, is something else that's foundationally there. And I think the third one I'll touch on is around creativity. Like
Mhm.
creativity is not being a creative. You don't need to be a visual artist. Creativity is problem solving and identifying opportunities and ways that you do that. And psychological safety is a really, really great way to discover things that you otherwise might not. If you've got a team of people doing the same thing repeatedly day after day, like your brain from a like an emotion, as a good example, is a shortcut way for you to make quick decisions. So you like something happens, you have a rapid response in your brain and you output in a certain way. So you carry bias into things that you're doing all the time. So it's sort of like being able to go, okay, if we have another POV on something that we're doing, which can come from, as I said before, an intern or someone new in the team, like how do you actively foster different points of view to get a well-rounded solution? And I'll give you a really simple example for that. If you have people from different cultural backgrounds in your team, maybe they were born in the USA, maybe they immigrated here. I put myself in that same boat. Like it's like, how do you actually understand each of their unique backgrounds, and like how do they contribute something that gives you I guess an experience that you otherwise wouldn't know. Like I'd actively seek it out, but I didn't grow up, in some of these cultures. So how could I pretend to even understand those little nuances that
Mhm.
that people like live and breathe every day? So how do you foster a way? Because that's again where you find the gold within ideation, problem solving, opportunities. So it's like, what are those environments that you can foster by understanding people in your team and giving them a chance to contribute in a way that levels it up? Because I've always found creativity at its best when you get unique points of view, either internally or from externally. And, we have our own sort of crowd from a Nobody Studios point of view, and that's great because like internally, everyone's in the weeds on things, like trying to just find the best path forward and make things the best they can be. Sometimes someone outside can just throw in a little nugget that actually helps you just go, okay, that's actually a great solve, or that's an opportunity. And then all of a sudden you can focus again and move forward at pace.
Yeah, you've given, I mean, I knew I was going to learn a lot from you, Andy, during this conversation, because I always do. But seriously, you've given us so much guidance on things that we can anticipate, right? Because at the end of the day, I think this is critical for organizations, especially for those that are scaling and global like we are at the studio. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you and get your advice on making sure we do our culture right at the studio. And so as we wrap up, right, I'm curious, how would you like to use your superpowers? I love asking people, and you've got a lot of them, I know, and you talked about some of them here. But how would you like to use your superpowers to help take our culture at Nobody Studios to the next level?
100%. So like, there's definitely been a theme through what I've talked about today. And for me, it's understanding and embracing change. I think as far as how we've always thought we should do things, how consumers want to play a role in this. So like that human psychology or cultures that exist, how does that connect with business services, things that you need to make the world a better place? So for me, it's been able to use my skills from launching businesses, strategy, marketing, communications, things to understand that part of the world, but then flip it over and go, okay, where's the world at right now? How do we have this iterative dynamic process? So it's sort of getting foundational things in place, but always thinking bigger as far as like what's happening, and let's not be so focused on what we're doing and think about new ideas that evolve and adapt. So yeah, I'm really, like, for me, driving change and doing things that no one's done before are the two things that I'm most excited about bringing.
I am excited too. And I just wanted to throw up this comment. Thank you, Kane Chamberlain, for joining us. He's one of an excellent person, human being, one of my favorite human beings on LinkedIn. And he wrote this comment, so powerful: a holistic and foundational approach from the start, not having a new business and then adding policies and diversity posters and why tolerance of people of color, disability, gender, and age is a part of the company culture, but it's actually complacency and status quo. A strong and ethical foundation steers the business and organization towards a healthy environment in our communities. I could not agree more, Kane. Thank you so much for joining us. And everybody else, thank you for joining us today. I know you all got a lot, as much as I did, out of this discussion. And for those of you that want to catch any of our prior live streams, don't forget that we have them all on our Nobody Crowd YouTube channel. You can watch all of them there. This will be on there as well. Share it with people, because we need to foster psychological safety in all of our organizations, and the time is now. And you've gotten some great tips from Andy. Thank you again, Andy, for making time for this conversation. I look forward to collaborating and co-creating with you at the studio.
Amazing. Thank you for the time. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.